If you like what you're seeing and hearing, please consider subscribing to the podcast. You can go to either Apple iTunes, the Google Play Store, Spotify, or Amazon Music in the podcast section. It'll hit Monday morning or Sunday afternoon, depending on when it posts. And the video will hit on YouTube and Spotify Monday. Spotify will hit Monday evening, and YouTube it'll hit Monday morning, 7 a.m., just like it does for the audio services. So please go to those places and consider subscribing or listening to the show. You can also write to me at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com if you want to write me a letter. Let me know what you think of the show, things like that. Or you can also find me on Twitter at JustLittleJoe. So go to those places and please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks. And with that, we'll get on to the episode. Hello, my name is Joseph Carlson, and I am joined on Gaming with Grief once again. This is episode 240 with Avin Carroll. Avin, I sent you articles about the Hasbro layoff. I mentioned we're going to talk about it some more because you and I always talk about business stuff on here, and we both do enjoy products from Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. You know, you play Magic more than I do. I play D&D more than you do, but we like the company. And
great products.
Yeah, I mean, I just got to say off the top, I said it last week in my own personal thing, laying off 1,100 people, which seems like it's staggered. Different articles I read said that some people will be notified in the next few months. So this, I think, is them warning people in a way, like, hey, this is the total amount of layoffs we're going to have, and it's going to happen in the next few months, which, as an aside, what does that do to morale at your company when everybody is kind of like, am I the one? Is it going to be me? Is it going to be the person next to me? Wow. You know,
it's never good. And interestingly enough, like you and I have talked about this privately many times, not on the podcast. Well, maybe not many times, but quite a bit over the last several days. So it feels like many times. And I was listening to podcast driving in and out of work the last couple of days. And it was an interview with Adam Grant on the Impact Theory podcast with Tom Bilyeu. And Adam Grant was talking about research around layoffs and how layoffs actually have an outsized negative impact, more than what you think. So the brain drain impact, the morale impact, people leaving, looking for other companies. There's a whole bunch of other aspects of it. And the research basically says that companies that are having hard times actually do better to do owner executive compensation reductions and compensation reductions really across the board than they do broad layoffs as far as like long-term outcomes for those companies. So like you sent me an article I think recently, or maybe it showed up in my feed, talking about Nintendo years ago went through really hard times.
I was actually just gonna bring that up. Because you hear about it float around, and I remember reading it years ago, but I wanted to pull it up. This is from Eurogamer.net, and this is an older article. It's by Tom Phillips. He's the editor-in-chief. It was updated on the 29th of January 2014, those Europeans and their dates. I'm just going to read the beginning of this. Nintendo President Satoru Iwata has announced that he will take a 50% pay cut in response to the company's continued financial problems. Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto and another director, Genyo Takada, will both take a 30% wage reduction. The 7 other members of the company's board will also take a 20% pay cut. The changes will take effect in February and last until June, at which time the adjustments will be reviewed based on the company's ongoing progress. Today's announcement comes just over a week after Nintendo significantly reduced its predictions for the company's performance this financial year, based primarily on poor sales of its struggling Wii U console. So they had poor sales with the Wii U. I enjoyed the Wii U, but there's been many things written about the Wii U had to walk so the Switch could run. Kind of a similar idea, being able to take something on the go. You could take your Wii U gamepad 5 feet from the console and then it would disconnect. The Switch is definitely a handheld device. It was one of those things I literally walk into like my kitchen that's like 10 feet away and it's like, you're too far away. I'm like, I'm literally 10 feet away. But anyway, so when Nintendo did a thing where when the company did poorly, they said, this is our problem, or, we're responsible. We're going to take a pay cut. And people have been bringing this up in the past weeks. You and I always talk about compensation. And to this day, your thing about stock options, is true. You get stock options in that. But I've read stuff from the Treasury about how these things are broken down, and it's written in legalese. So to me, these CEOs are still getting some type of compensation other than the stock options, it would seem, because otherwise, you know, yeah, I'm going to be able to take these stock options with me or get these stock options, but I need compensation now. And so all that kind of stuff is like totally still kind of...
Every company does it differently, right? But usually when you're at that level in an organization, you're getting your salary, which is usually pretty substantial to the average person, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. But when you talk about, like, you know, grab, like, well, I'm trying not to think of a famous executive, but like a large company. So, like, you'll say the CEO of Comcast, right? He's getting paid most likely several $100,000s a year in a salary, and then he's also getting compensation and stock options and other benefits that probably totals into the millions of dollars per year. We'll say it's $1 million.
Yeah.
So say 60% of his compensation is in stock. It's far more difficult to control that. Now, with that said, right, like, that's still money that's got to come from somewhere to buy those shares,
right,
or to issue them. So, because they could sell those shares and bring that revenue in on the market instead of holding them. So it's hard to equate and hard to tax, but from a compensation standpoint, when you're the CEO of Nintendo, right, like, maybe their agreement is, hey, we're going to pay you $1 million a year, but we're not going to give you any stocks. That's just not usually how it works. Usually for executive compensation, because they want performance, they want the company to increase its contribution or shareholder value, they usually compensate you in that way too, because then it's tied to your performance.
Right.
The problem is it's easy to gain. Now in this case, right, like, talking about Nintendo, they did this with the Wii U. Years later, the Switch is taken off. Nintendo's doing fantastic. They're licensing stuff all over the place. The company's actually performed very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, they're the movie.
A prime example of cutting compensation produces better long-term results than layoffs would have.
And I don't know if it was Nintendo, one Japanese developer, maybe it was Sega, somebody, maybe From Software, the people that make Dark Souls. One of them announced they would actually they were not only going to redo their pay structure, but that pay structure for employees that they were trying to hire would also include base pay. So they're basically raising the minimum wage of these developers, or like because they want talent to come in. And they also said, we want to redo our payment structure because we want there to be more incentives for people to come work for us. And I was like, you don't hear about that a lot. You don't. I told you offhand, you know, we talked privately, getting back to Hasbro really quick, but like, there was a big leak with Insomniac that made the Spider-Man games and stuff like that. And more of that leak is coming out that I believe Spider-Man 2 sold, like, in a week, sold like 8 million copies or something. They needed to sell, I think, 5 to break even, and Sony was, so they made above and beyond, and Sony was still talking about laying off parts of the team and talking to Insomniac internally about, you need to make some cuts. To go back to Hasbro, the only thing I really wanted to bring up was this, from the Larian Studios, I always say his name wrong. I want to say it's Sven Vinky. I always say his name wrong. I can never get it right. But he basically, this is an old, not old, but it was published on December 14th, 2023 by Harvey Randall. It's a PC Gamer article.
That's a little over a week old.
Yeah, it says Larian Studios CEO Sven Viknicki. Again, sorry, Sven. You made an amazing game. Vinky, yeah, your team is amazing. He has taken to Twitter today and in a thread celebrating both Baldur's Gate 3 numerous awards, which, by the way, the Game Awards cut people off 30 seconds into their speech. And so journalists had to reach out and say, what did you want to say? And they had to, like, write articles to say, here's who I wanted to thank, which is sad. Anyway, he mentioned the recent layoffs that occurred at Dungeons & Dragons. He revealed that, quote, of the people who were in the original meeting room, there's almost nobody left, unquote. So, you know, Hasbro laid off 1,100 employees. My thing is this, like, yes, there was a licensing fee for Baldur's Gate 3, but, you know, D&D is going to make that money back, obviously. But the thing is, it's like, so these people that work together, you know, Larian's doing the work, but they're working with the D&D team to, like, you know, finalize this. They're using new rules, apparently, off the rule set for the new Dungeons & Dragons coming out next year. And so they really had to work with the team to adapt that to Baldur's Gate 3. It seems like that's a lot of hard work to just go to that team and start laying people off. You know, it's like, but we've got results for what we've done, and you're still laying us off. So, like, I'm powerless to do anything, you know, really.
And I couldn't find the article, but I told you about it. Like, I went through an article right after you had told me that the layoffs were coming, and they were happening within Wizards. And maybe it was the day after that I read this article. I think it was maybe Business Insiders or a more business publication.
Yeah.
And no, it wasn't. It was GeekWire. I remember it was from GeekWire. And basically what they said was like, it makes no sense that Hasbro is letting people in Wizards go, because Wizards is the only part of the company that's been consistently profitable over the last few years. I think Wizards' profit was up like 40% last year,
which is kind of
while the rest of the company was down.
Yeah, which is kind of a triumph, because we've talked privately about Magic the Gathering, especially in, I think a year ago, they really had like a glut and they were releasing too many sets and things like that. And it seems like they've let the gas off of that, and they've started doing collaborations, which was sold really well. They did Lord of the Rings, which I was collecting for a bit. Then they did Doctor Who. Some friends of mine reached out. They're going to do a Final Fantasy thing. You know, I have friends that obviously play games. They're going to do a Final Fantasy thing. And so it seems like with them kind of like, you know, pumping the brakes on the amount of cards they're producing and getting these really universe beyond collaborations, you know, they, again, like you said, if their profit is up, what do you say, 40%? Then, so then it's like, wow, a year ago we were not at 40%. I saw the graphs, and I'm terrible at reading graphs, but I know when a line goes down. And I was like, man, how are they going to come back from this? And it seems like now they are. And like you said, 40%. It's like, guys, we're making gains. You know, and this team, Baldur's Gate 3, yes, it took years to do, but we got it across the finish line. And, you know, I won 6 awards at the Game Awards. Everybody I know that's played Baldur's Gate 3 is like, this is amazing. I've had people in my in-person D&D game say, hey, I'm just going to remake my character from Baldur's Gate 3 and play D&D. Is that okay? And we're like, yes, that's totally fine. It's bringing people into the hobby, you know? And to me, it just seems strange that those are the people who are like, you guys all did a great job, now get out.
Well, and it's obviously not that cold, right? Or it's not, I mean, it kind of is cold, really, but it's not that cold. It's not like, hey, great job, see ya. It's more like, you know, this is coming down from on high, and we've got to pick people, and like, how do we do it? And so they're looking at expenses, who's producing and contributing and within the company. And my guess is that Hasbro came down to Wizards and was like, hey, you gotta get rid of people too, right? Like, you're not gonna not be affected by this, because it wouldn't be fair to the other parts of the company.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's places where you guys can get lean. So in all likelihood, some analyst somewhere came up and was like, hey, we think that you can reduce your size by 10% or whatever it was. Because within Wizards, it wasn't that big of a cut.
There was, I saw a Twitter thread, which I can't find, but it was somebody who was like another journalist who was kind of like trying to collate the people that have said, I've been laid off today. And, you know, some of them were like public hosts, but some of them were like artists for Magic the Gathering, which, you know, I play Magic, you play Magic. I have the art books down here where they do like the lore of the set, and what I like about it is it's a coffee table book. So this art that's 2x3 on the card, very small, actually gets blown up in these art books, and you just see the totality of, you know, it's like a 12-inch by, and you're like, this is beautiful. Like, these people worked so hard, and
the art's amazing that they go into, right? Like it's really disappointing. I think the total number was like 25 to 30 people within Wizards, but Wizards also isn't a very big wing, and so. To me personally, I think it's really disappointing. You know, I'm looking at it from a perspective of like, look, Hasbro, you have a successful division of your company that's producing new revenue and is growing.
Yeah, you got two. Yeah, you have the Wizards, which is making money. Like, don't hurt the gold goose in a way, you know, or at least the silvered goose. Like, whatever, it's making gains. So
further down in this article from PC Gamer that we were referencing, they actually point blank call it out. In an investor meeting in October this year, Hasbro CEO Chris Cook,
I think it's Cox. Yeah, I think it's
Cox. Unfortunate.
Yeah, I know.
Specifically mentioned Baldur's Gate 3 as contributing factor for a 40% increase in digital gaming revenue, alongside Monopoly Go and Magic the Gathering. So there's the 40%.
Right.
Yeah. So all said, right? Like, it's just. one, to your very first question, right? Like, how does that feel? Like, I can't even imagine. I've never actually had it happen to me. I grew up in retail jobs, and so around the holidays is when you're busiest.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up to the holidays is usually still really busy.
Well, so, I mean, you work in IT, but what I keep hearing from all the gaming podcasts I listen to is everybody takes like the last 2 weeks of the year off. So like about now, people are having time off until the first of the year. Even game developers, like a lot of people reach out on Twitter, like even Insomniac's like, hey, we're going to turn everything off. Even Destiny, Bungie was like, hey, we're going to turn everything off for the end of the year. And all the gaming journalists I know are like, hey, we're going to take a break for a bit. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And like even where I work, we're doing freezes, right? Release freeze. So like they're I don't know why the word's escaping my brain. Change. We do a change freeze for holidays, so that we're not rolling out changes over the holidays when we're on reduced staff, and we're not gaming at all. But it's pretty common in the IT space.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, too, like, I don't know. I just think it's so unfortunate. And like, I don't know about morale or like, you know, they're coming out, especially Wizards of the Coast, they're coming out with a new version of D&D next year. And the two main leads, Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford, I think Jeremy Crawford said in an interview with Todd Kennerik that like all 3 books over 1,000 pages. So split between the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual.
Wow.
And so that I can't, and they said we have art, we have new art for like subclasses, we have new art for monsters. Like, to me, that'd be the time you're like, I don't know if we could lay, like you said, it wasn't many people, but just as you said again, it would seem to be all hands would be needed on deck. And then I would imagine I would be not okay with it, but I would understand if there was layoffs after D&D 2024 shipped. Because you're like, oh yeah, they submitted the art, everything's for sale. They don't need as many people, you know, which is terrible. But
and I'd even bring up like, hey, like maybe there's overlap in skills and responsibility that Hasbro already had in house, and so that's kind of how they picked and chose the people. But what Wizards does is so different from the rest of Hasbro that I can't imagine that there's a massive amount of overlap.
Yeah. It seems just, I mean, tragic, and it's one of these things too. You know, in gaming all the time they say vote with your wallet. You know, like, well, I don't want to give money to this company if they're just going to make bad decisions or do something horrific or whatever. Like I did it with Blizzard because I kept reading so much about Bobby Kotick. I was like, man, I don't want this guy's stock options to go up, you know? And that's just a decision I made. But it's getting to the point now where you can't even do that because I like D&D. I think the people did a good job. I buy their products, and then they lay off 1,100 people right before Christmas. So you're like, well, I have absolutely no power. Like I could.
Well, so Wizards didn't lay off.
No, I know. Yeah, but they're owned by.
But still, right? Like even Hasbro, right? Like Hasbro's a toy company, but like that's their roots. And so you're going into Christmas like, hey, our best time of year when we're looking to get back into the black. And sorry, guys, we're letting y'all go.
Yeah. Also, I heard
right.
They owned E1, which is like their media company, and it's who made the D&D movie. They bought it for like $1 billion or something, and you know and now they sold it. They're going to sell it for $500 million. So they're taking they're taking a bath on that. A lot of the E1 movies
Did the movie actually do really well though?
It did. I think a lot of the stuff that they do is what you see with D&D or you know E1. What I remember is like the Battleship movie, like a lot of Milton Bradley properties or Hasbro properties that get turned into movies, even if you think they're ridiculous. That's kind of like their wing of whatever. So I don't know. Just in general, I mean, this is just kind of a bummer of a story, you know. And I hope everybody that got laid off finds a new job and is able to kind of go about. I hope you have a good Christmas. I mean, that's all I got to say. I mean, I don't know what that's like.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, it's good to know in advance before Christmas because, hey, at least you get to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you're still employed and you'll still have an income through Christmas. Right. And you're hopefully warned soon enough that you're not making any extravagant gift purchases.
Right.
But
if you don't know, you don't know.
Now you're like, well, Christmas is going to get real lean, kids. And that sucks.
Yeah, and then too, like a lot of people talk about. I mean, this happens in gaming as well. We talked about the layoffs in gaming, but the idea that so Wizards is gonna at some time have to ramp back up hiring, And are people going to want to work for, or I'm sorry, Hasbro, are people going to want to work in those divisions when they go, well, wait a minute, wasn't it Christmas last year, a couple years ago, that they just went through and laid people off? So like, do I want to put, my talent, whatever, yes, it is a resume builder, but like at the same time, is it gainful employment? Like that's got to factor into people's.
I don't know if gainful is the question to ask, but long term, right? What are my long term prospects with this company? Is it growing? Am I going to be able to stay? I mean, Hasbro's kind of commoditized at this point. Yeah. So, what are your long term prospects? Maybe you get a year or two out of it, maybe 3. But it makes you wonder. Management obviously is doing something wrong that they're losing money.
Yeah.
You can't grow in business if you don't take risks, but it's always disappointing when executive management in particular, doesn't take ownership of the things that didn't perform, doesn't take accountability. And maybe they have in this case, but I haven't seen any publications where they're like, look, like we made some bad calls. We're laying 1,100 people off, but we're also cutting compensation to all of our executives too. Now, inherently, like if you're compensated in stock and stock options, when a company takes a hit and profits are down, you take a hit and you lose money. But usually it's not in a way that actually hurts them the way it does the frontline worker.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. Our other political podcast, I hate to bring it up, but there's a meme going around of a guy slamming playing cards on a table, and people just put the text over it. Somehow capitalism's fault. Like he's so mad that he's like throwing the cards in. Basically, it does feel like this is just a knock-on thing of like, well, the graph didn't go up enough, so we have to make. I remember years ago you said to me, you were a manager and you said that the number one thing you can control is labor. If you're looking at a spreadsheet saying this is how many employees we have, this is what we spend on labor, we need to cut that cost. So
it's the easiest place to save money and pinch expenses.
Right.
In most cases, you have your fixed capital costs, your buildings, your your wizards, you've got your printing equipment because they probably don't outsource it.
Right. Oh, the printing?
The camera there, Joe.
There was a big hair right in the camera. I was like...
But yeah, so like, well, it wasn't yours.
Yeah, no. Oh, burn. The 20-year-old burn. Well, they don't control printing. In fact, it came out that Penguin was printing a lot of their books, and their deal ended. And Penguin is like, we're not renewing it. So Wizards is going to have to go to other printers to get.
I was thinking of Wizards, not Wizards, but the Magic stuff specifically.
Oh,
they probably print their own cards, but I wouldn't be surprised if they outsource it.
There was a lot of guffaws about that because they, D&D, there's a thing called the Deck of Many Things. Basically, you pull a card from the deck, and it's like a random thing happens, and it's fun, and I just find it distracting. So I haven't. But they printed physical cards, and they were all subpar, and everybody goes, "Wow, coming from a company that prints Magic the Gathering cards, you can't print a deck of cards that are the same every time." So they had to delay the shipping. Anyway, I don't know, man. This is just depressing, and I wish it wasn't Christmas was happening to people. I just wanted to talk about it on the pod. I mean, it's going to affect a lot of people's lives. I wish those people the best. I guess, it's still a resume builder too. And I guess there's going to be maybe some stiff drinks in those people's futures when somebody will say what happened, and they're like, "Well, let me tell you about what it was like to get laid off from Hasbro."
And really honestly, think about it. Like, if you're an artist designing these cards or doing design work in these books, right? And that's what you do is art, and their work, as we talked about earlier, is phenomenal, right? Like, where else do you get to go where you get to do that? Where your art skills aren't being shuffled off into some marketing thing instead of coming up with great ideas and doing fantasy art. Like, to me, it seems like one of those dream jobs for most artists, at least artists that enjoy doing fantasy style art. And to lose that's just got to be devastating.
Yeah, it's
where do I go?
It's the visibility. It's the visibility. There's really few companies that Pathfinder. It's the idea of like, yes, you're probably not getting paid a lot as art, but the fact that Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons go around the world, that people in different countries are looking at your art or reading the description for one of your modules or reading.
And you're actually getting paid to do the thing that you love, right? Like, now, don't get me wrong. Like, a lot of artists have regular day jobs and still do the thing they love.
Right.
But to actually be able to get paid for it is kind of what, from outside looking in, it kind of seems like it would be the dream, the goal. Like every day I get to go to work and I get to make these beautiful designs that I'm inspired to create and then have them be printed and sold and people see my work.
Right. Yeah, it's like I said, it's, you know, you may feel that they're not getting paid enough, but like that idea of like somebody in, like if I'm in the United States and I'm an artist and somebody in Spain, you go to a convention, like, man, I saw your, and even like the text things for Magic the Gathering, like all that stuff has to have meetings and you have to be like, how to, like, that's one thing, like the art is amazing in Magic, but one thing that still is crazy, and did D&D to a lesser extent, is the feature creep of, we have a new rule set, we want to introduce these new mechanics, how is that going to work with the old mechanics? You know, how are people going to be able to roll that in? That works with D&D, but on Magic the Gathering, that is a new level. I can't imagine the Excel spreadsheets and the graphs they have in their meeting rooms. Of
you go back 20 years, be like, oh, well, we already had a mechanic like that, kind of.
Yeah.
Or if that mechanic and this mechanic go together, you've got something that's so OP, no one's going to want to play it.
I mean, the best things of inspiration have to be like token mechanics where you're like, well, we had this and this thing, but like we're doing Lord of the Rings, so instead of using this, why don't we use food? And somebody's like, oh, like that stuff has to be a little bit easier. But like, I don't know, to me this is a big bummer. I mean, it seemed like you said, 40% growth in Magic the Gathering. I don't know what D&D was.
They should be popping corks and celebrating right now.
Yeah, and now they're at home.
They just took the air out of the room.
Yeah, now they're. I just watched Scrooge recently again with some relatives, and they're like Bobcat Goldthwait, like sitting on the side of the road. I don't know if you remember his character, but he like got, you know, laid off, and he's trying to drink a whiskey or whatever on the street. It's like, let the man have his bottle. Like, he just got laid off. Like, so, yeah. So thanks, Avin, again for joining me and talking about this. We will probably, just as a heads up, we will talk about Bobby Kotick leaving Activision, but I want to see, like I just told Avin before we started recording, I want to see what's going to take place within Microsoft. They've already let some people go and made some changes to their hire CEO, whatever, but I want to see what's going to happen, like game decisions, like is Phil Spencer going to come out and say, hey, World of Warcraft is now part of Game Pass? Avin disagrees. I want to see what's going to happen. Yeah, you're like never, never. But we'll talk about that when it comes.
Maybe not never, never. I just don't think it's very likely.
I mean, hey, anything in a storm. I mean, whatever. We can talk about that later. So, Avin, thank you once again for joining me right before Christmas. And I'll probably talk. I'll talk to you soon in other episodes. So, see everybody later. I'll talk to everybody next week.